Roughly in the middle of the column was a group of 5 women. There was nothing to mark them out from their fellows, at least not at first glance, but to someone really looking, there was an alertness that should have warned the slavers that something was up. They all wore the same kinds of wooden stocks, 2 long pieces of wood joined by a hinge behind the neck, then a large hole that clamped around the throat, followed by a smaller hole that held the left wrist and another ahead of that for the right. At the far end, out of reach of the hands, was a simple clasp to hold the whole thing locked together. A rope linked the back of each slave's stock to the front of the stock of the person behind them, so the slaves were effectively shackled in strings of 5. The stocks alone made it almost impossible for the slaves to escape, and even if one did, she couldn't even feed herself. Being roped together meant they couldn't run either, as they'd jerk each other around and would almost certainly fall within a few strides. As they came level with the path that crossed from one side of the road to the other, the women made their move. Without a word, the one in front jerked her hands and the stocks flew apart. Within a second the other 4 had done the same, and all 5 were bolting down the path to the right, wordlessly fleeing into the forest. The speed and silence of the break caught the slavers completely by surprise, and the women were a good 50 feet down the path before the one closest to them raised the alarm. The guard kept his position and flung his axe about, screaming at the remaining slaves to sit down where they were. Cowed, they immediately tumbled to the ground, the slavers angrily waving their spears and axes around them. Only 2 of the slavers were mounted, and these shot off down the path in hot pursuit, the grin of the chase etched on their faces. It would be a short run. There was no way a woman could outrun a horse. The only question was whether to recapture or kill them. Wolfston swooped down to get a closer look, but had to stay at treetop height to keep his ribbon from winding through the branches. The tight and twisting nature of the trail allowed the women to increase their lead before they got to a bend in the track where a low branch came down to shoulder height. Their leader raised her hand, and they skittered to a halt. "Here, pull this branch back around the corner so they can't see it," she said in an urgent yet quiet voice. Their feet scrabbled for grip in the dirt, and their whole bodies strained to keep it pulled back as far as possible. Wolfston floated down through the branches to get a closer look. The leading woman picked up a stone that she could hold in her right hand, which she held behind her. "I'll go out as a dummy. Don't let go until you're certain you'll hit him." She stepped out onto the path at the corner so she could just be seen. The lead horseman cantered into view, ducking his head out of the way of the lower branches. He gave a cry of triumph as he saw her, and urged his horse forward. The woman stood stock still as he approached, her face frozen in a mask of terror. Then suddenly she turned and ran. Another glad cry echoed from the horseman as he focused on her disappearing skirt and flying hair, but it never completed. The released branch caught him completely unawares, knocking the wind out of him and sweeping him off his horse. He hit the deck face down, travelling feet first. The pain from the branch was forgotten as the rocks and roots on the path tore at his lips and nostrils. He'd have screamed if he'd been able to breathe. Finally he came to a halt, pain hitting him from all directions. By God, he'd make that girl pay when he caught her. It was a thought both clear and powerful. It was also his last. The woman dropped her blood-stained stone next to the head she'd just smashed with it. She paid the bleeding corpse no attention at all and grabbed the man's spear just in time to duck out of view of the second mounted man as he came down the path in pursuit of his friend. When he rounded the corner, he saw one of the escapees falling to her knees next to his fallen friend, as if to steal his purse. He howled with rage and raised his spear above his head as he rode towards her. He never saw the other woman's spear thrusting up from his left. It entered his side below the ribcage, but in an upwards manner, slicing through his lungs and other organs. He gasped and blood bubbled and oozed out of his mouth. A snarl twisted his face as he brought his own spear around his body and into the woman who had struck him. But she was no longer there. She ducked under his horse and out of reach. Uncoordinated and struggling to breathe, the man had lunged too far and had to struggle to sit back upright on his horse. It was a wasted effort. The rock claimed its second victim, thrown straight into his face by the purse stealer. He toppled backwards off his horse and onto the ground, dropping his spear as he went. Like his friend, he too fell on his face. Fury took hold, and the adrenaline shooting through his veins allowed him to raise himself on his arms. But that was as far as he got before the purse stealer plunged his own spear into his back. He felt the blow, but there was no real pain as he slumped once more to the ground. There was only the blood filling his lungs even faster than before, stopping him from taking a proper breath. A horrible glubbing accompanied the bright red bubbles frothing from his gaping mouth. 1/10 of a lungful was all he managed to take. Dizziness began to take hold. In desperation he rolled onto his side, shifting his weight to snatch another 1/10 of a lungful. In front of him, 2 other women were calming the horses. The one who'd stabbed him first was watching back up the path in case of further pursuit, his own blood trickling over her right hand as she held the spear. The purse stealer and another woman were now searching the body of his friend, stripping it of anything they could use. One chuckled when she pulled out his purse, felt the satisfying weight, and heard the lovely jingle of coin. The woman on watch turned to look at him. To his surprise, there was no hatred on her face. In fact, there was no emotion at all. She simply registered that he was still alive, turned and walked towards him, moving the spear into a two-handed grip. His vision blurred and began to fade. His chest heaved again and again, trying to get air into the fluid-filled lungs. He barely felt the spear entering his chest, rupturing his heart. It made no real difference. Hypoxia took its last steps, and he drifted painlessly out of the world. "Finally," she muttered as she pulled the blade free. "Quickly, girl," she said. "Strip them of anything we can use. We'll have to ride 2 on one horse and the 3 smallest of us on the other. I don't know how far the poor beasts will be able to take us like that, but it'll put more distance quicker between us and the slavers."